Welcome to the Far Cry New Dawn Guns for Hire minus the Animals Part 2. Today we're going to be looking into Nana, Pastor Jerome, and the Judge, who may or may not be Rook. So get on your conspiracy theory hats, because I have no idea, but we're going to try figuring out this guy's personality or girl's personality. With that being all said, our first subject is Nana, and I believe Nana is either an ESTP or ISTP. However, I'm going to go with ESTP because she seems to favor SC function over TI function. And it's pretty obvious. Most of the time when you talk to Nana, she's always talking about how she loves shooting things. Even when you meet her, the first thing she wants you to do before she joins you is go through her shooting obstacle course, because why not? She wants to see if you're worth her time.
I'll be tied up in a tree and left for the bears. You're a damn good shot.
Nana also seems to not always think before she talks. She's very direct and blunt. An example of that is when she goes to Pastor Jerome and asks him if he wants to sleep with her.
What do you think about rediscovering some carnal sins with a curious member of your flock?
If that wasn't compelling enough, her job of choice was being an extreme tourism guide. She would take entitled teenagers and adults and bring them into the forest and show them how to survive. However, she would troll them in the process, just because she can.
I used to be an extreme tourism guide. Babysit rich city kid pups looking to find themselves in the wilderness. Oh, lose themselves more like. They paid me hand over fist to make them miserable for weeks. Oh, I've lived a good life.
Nana's secondary function would be TI, which is pretty overshadowed by her SC function, and potentially because Nana's a little crazy.
I'm a witch, and you can't kill me.
Nana manifests her TI within her ability to survive, and she does this constantly by training. She's always practicing with her sniper rifle, and anytime anyone comes up to her, she'll mention that you need to learn how to shoot in this world in order to protect yourself, and you need to hunt in order to feed yourself.
Used to take rich tourists out on hunting trips back before all this. They wouldn't last a second out here.
Sadly, there aren't too many other examples, other than the ones that are intertwined with her FE function, where you could see her TI being active.
Oh, I can boogie to this. I've seen all kinds of teen countercultures, from hippies to hackers. The highwaymen are just reheated nihilists with helmets. It's a good excuse to not clean your room or plant any seeds if you don't believe in humanity.
And speaking of her tertiary function, we're about to get into it too. Obviously, it's FE. Nana surprisingly uses her FE quite a lot, and it's often mixed. She likes using it in mocking ways, like she does with Judge, where she mimics the same sound Judge makes and tells Judge to grow up.
If I hear you sigh one more time without telling me what's wrong, I'll snatch that mask off your face so fast it'll make your head spin. Then, after I know who you are, I'm gonna find your mother and tell her she raised a whiner. We're all carrying a burden out here. We all got trauma. We all got it rough. You can either talk it out or swallow it, but none of this vague maudlin nonsense down the middle. That's what I thought.
And she does it in more positive ways, where she reinforces people like Carmina. And she tells her, good, it's time to grow up, and I'm glad that you're growing up.
I think I'm getting even better at shooting these days.
Well, shoot, chickadee, I'd say you are too. Guess this is when some grown-up comes along and says something sappy like, well, you shouldn't grow up so fast.
Yeah.
Hickory shit! Nobody respects kids, not even me. Grow up and kick ass, darling.
Another huge indicator for Nana's FE usage is how open she can be. You could approach her and she'll almost answer any question, but not always in the way people want, because Nana is also mixing her SE and TI in this. What she wants to do is she wants to prod you, figure you out, and then she wants to find a way to get a reaction out of you, which may or may not be malicious depending on the companion she's talking to. And finally, Nana's final function is NI. Nana isn't concerned so much about the future. She's more content with what's now, and she wants to dabble within her other functions instead of her NI function. She's lived her life, and she doesn't really care so much what happens in the future, other than her surviving. I'm also not sure if Nana's completely aware of the effect she could have on people, such as Judge, who clearly is in a very stressed situation, and instead of trying to understand Judge, she'll mock Judge instead.
I think they've got some splinters in their gray matter that need tweezing.
Which may make the situation worse. Next up is Pastor Jerome, who's completely on the opposite spectrum of Nana. Pastor Jerome's first function is NI. A good example of Pastor Jerome's NI usage is when Brooke gets captured by Joseph's goons, and you're inside of a van, and Pastor Jerome somehow tracks down the van and saves Brooke just in time. And when he's confronted, he says that the Lord pointed him in the right direction.
I knew it meant trouble when we couldn't reach you. I'm glad the Lord pointed me in the right direction.
Are you starting to see the similarities between him and Joseph? A little off topic, but I'm starting to believe that Ubisoft made Pastor Jerome in order to complement Joseph. They seem to be two sides of the same coin. Another factor that strongly implements that Pastor Jerome is an NI user is his insight in practically every matter of the resistance, and he constantly has hunches. A good example of that is when the Woodson Pig Farm community doesn't stay in contact with Pastor Jerome for a few days. He worries about them, and for good reason, because he's right, they are in danger. Pastor Jerome is also really big on symbolism.
But when he lost faith in Joseph, the bottom dropped out for him. His idol was made of sand.
He enjoys quoting the Bible, and after you save the people from the pig farm, he mentions the story of David and Goliath, and how you represent David and the Peggies represent the Goliath, and how David was victorious, which directly correlates with you being an inspiration for those in Hope County. I could most likely continue going on with examples of Jerome's NI usage. We're going to move on to his secondary function, which would be FE. Jerome truly cares for the people in the community. He will lend a helping hand whenever he can. He's a very good example of a very healthy FE user. And just like most FE users, he's prone to be very honest about his emotions.
I appreciate what you've done here. You have an instinct for help.
And there are several examples of that. The example we're going to be using today is in the beginning when you first meet him. Mary May Fairgrave is carrying a bunch of crates down the stairs. He freaks out and says, "You're going to break your neck," and takes away the top crate in order to make her voyage down the stairs a lot easier. Another example of his FE altruism, it feels like, is when he finds a defector within Joseph's little cult. He sends you to go save the defector, and then he allows the defector to be free. He sets him away, and in that moment he mentions something to us. He says, "Turn the other cheek."
Turning the other cheek. That is the righteous path. Great job, Deputy. We've shown that we can open our arms and embrace those who have been led astray. And there will be others. You've solved every problem I've put before you. The Lord will guide you now. Next time you're in Falls End, come by the church. There's always time for a prayer.
This dude is inspiring. His tertiary function is TI. Jerome Jeffries uses this function to rationalize his emotions and morals. And as with the nature of TI, he's also very good at finding logical inconsistencies, and he attempts to find the patterns to find solutions for certain issues and problems.
When there aren't any limits on what you're willing to do, eventually everything will go off the rails. That's what happened with the twins.
Or at least what causes them. But mostly he uses his TI function to validate and reason what his NI believes is going to happen in the future. And a good example of that is his justification for being at war with Eden's Gate. He believes that hatred and violence is a betrayal for what's good in everyone, and the violence that they're in is temporary, but it's also needed.
Hatred and violence towards people because of their beliefs, regardless of where it comes from, is a betrayal of what's best inside each and every one of us. Remember, the violence we are taking part in is needed. It's also temporary.
And I agree with him. Hatred and violence only causes destruction. There's no purpose of it. And in this case, because Eden's Gate is a violent force, it kind of makes sense that they have to fight it. They can't just avoid it or negotiate with it because it's violent in nature, so they have to deal with it in the same fashion. But sadly, due to Pastor Jerome's introverted nature, we don't see much more TI usage other than his justifications for what he does. And this leads to his final function, SE, and it's extremely well developed. Pastor Jerome has the ability to live within the moment. He's able to realize the reality of a situation and not get lost within his planning and his idealization of certain situations. And that is highly impressive because not many people will develop their lower functions throughout their lives. It is often neglected. A pretty good example of Pastor Jerome's SE usage takes direct place after you kill John Seed. They're throwing a celebration within the bar. He's very aware that the battle is not done, and there are plenty of dangers on the way. However, he's going to push that to the side because he needs to enjoy the moment with everyone. And that's not the first time he's done this.
When the collapse came, Joseph took it to mean that he'd been right about everything. That all his violence had been justified. No. It's not predicting the future that matters. What matters is living a meaningful life every second.
Which leads to the conclusion of him being INFJ. And a very healthy one at that. And our final companion may be the most complicated one in this list, mainly because they don't talk. They only respond within grunts and groans. And that companion is the judge, or, as Herc, Pastor Jerome, and Carmina notice, the deputy from the previous game. However, there's also another issue that needs to be addressed. Because you play as deputy in the previous title, their decisions are your decisions, which indicate they could be various types. And the deputy that exists within this timeline is a very broken individual. They've been brainwashed by Joseph and racked by guilt. So instead of using the normal formula I've established of the first function to inferior function, we're going to first try to figure out their personality. And the most notable function we can see within Judge is their SC function. They use it for almost everything. Even when they were sane 17 years ago, SC was one of their main functions they constantly used. I mean, the whole experience was following orders and getting into the thick of battle. And with that being said, that also means one of their inferior functions has to be NI. And that's exactly why Rook, or the Judge, require others to guide them, because they're not able to see the future. They rely on others to give them orders.
Rook, put the cuffs on them. Everybody thinks they have free will.
The weak have their purpose. You'll understand that soon enough.
You'll walk the path.
And those are the easy functions to figure out. Now we have to determine whether they're FI users or FE users, which will indicate that they either use TE or TI. Another consideration that will also make things a little more difficult is the fact that Rook, aka the Judge, is also mute.
You all right in there? Just nod for yes, shake for no.
But other than that small little detail, I've came to the conclusion that the Judge, aka Rook, is an FI user. Here's why. Even though Rook doesn't talk that much, you can see Rook is very strongly driven by their sense of justice. It defines them as a person, so anything that goes against it, coincidentally, goes against their viewpoints. Which explains why Rook is willing to throw themselves in dangerous situations all the time for others.
You shouldn't have come for me. Should've run.
I didn't think you'd come back.
And even when it's not necessary, Rook will still do it. And a prime example of that is at the end of Far Cry 5, when Joseph confronts Rook for the final time and says, "You could leave in peace with your friends, or you can face me." And Rook canonically picks to face Joseph, in turn making the prophecy come true.
It is finished, child.
Oh my god.
If Rook was a TI Dom or TI Auxiliary, they would instead choose to walk away and come back with a bigger army to dispose of Joseph. They also wouldn't risk themselves neck and limb for people that they don't really know. It's not like they really had enough time to get to know everyone and befriend people. And the biggest indicator of FI takes place after the bombs fall. Instead of trying to figure out a rational reason to why everything's happening, Rook instead gives into their FI. Their self-values on justice and their identity is now shattered. And this is where Joseph comes in. Joseph can see this. He realizes that Rook has very strong values on justice and is guilt-ridden by the injustice they just cause everyone.
Countless people have been killed, and it is your fault. The world is on fire, and it's your fault.
Which leads to their complete transformation into the judge.
You just went full psycho,
What's up,
huh?
Doggo?
Just lurking in the woods like some silent mass killing machine from a slasher flick, huh? All right, man. Good chat. Yeah, nice catching up with you. Good luck with your upcoming murder spree of teenagers or whatever. Bye.
And because Rook uses FI, that automatically means that Rook also uses T, which I'm also going to assume is a lower function. And it really shows when Rook is the judge. The only thing Rook is concerned about is eliminating the target in the most efficient way possible. And I'm pretty sure I don't even need to show examples of that because it's obvious. All Rook does is murder. Rook has become the embodiment of death. And when you put all those functions together, you could either get Rook being an ESFP or ISFP. I'm going to be leaning a little more towards ISFP, albeit a very unhealthy one that has forsaken their main function because of the trauma they've endured. They don't believe that they have the right to their own opinions anymore and rely on others to guide them, which is the canonical and sad ending for Rook, because now they're just a pawn in a big game of chess.
And when the world is ready to be born anew, we will step into the light. I am your father. And you are my child.
Thank you very much for listening to my MBTI analyses. I know that's not a word, but it is a word now. If you like what you see and hear, feel free to leave a subscription, like, and all those fun things. Also, feel free to share this to the MBTI community. I want to hear what their opinion is on this. I'm also aware that the judge, aka Rook, is commonly typed as ICP, and you could see I obviously very much disagree with that because I believe they're an ISFP that is very damaged. Anyways, thank you very much once again. Have a very nice day, evening, or night.